On this AirCheck episode, we continue our conversation with Jimmy Fink.
This is part 2 of a 4-part series with Jimmy Fink. Jimmy takes us back to those formative years of his radio career and how his contemporaries welcomed him. The story of the WPLJ call letters, those legendary PLJ DJs he was fortunate to work with, and the PLJ format change in the early 80s. His conversation with Graham Nash and his elevator encounter with John Lennon and Yoko Ono.
Here we go.
Welcome to AirCheck Season 4, a podcast about radio's personality from radio personalities, managers, consultants, owners, and your most humble hosts from Philadelphia, Rich DeSisto and Paul Kelly.
I'm Rich DeSisto.
And I'm Paul Kelly.
Legendary radio personality Jimmy Fink has rocked the Big Apple radio dial for decades.
You can currently hear him on 107.1 The Peak in Westchester, New York, where he does Afternoon Drive.
On our previous episode, part 1 of 4, Jimmy flashed back to those moments when he was hired at the beginning of 2 legendary New York City radio stations, WABC-FM, which became WPLJ.
He started quizzing me all about music and what did I know about music and why did I want to hear the songs I requested. I went down to the station to meet him. I never actually made a tape, but the following Saturday, which was July 12th, 1970, he put me on the air.
And the new 92.3 KROCK.
Some of the best times in radio are when you join a station right from the beginning. You're not just a hire of a station that's been around a long time. You're there right from the beginning, and it's so exciting.
And his greatest moments with musicians, including Robin Gibb of the Bee Gees and Robert Plant from Led Zeppelin.
Robert Plant, I've met a few times. My first impression of him was that he's really tall. I'm tall. I'm 6'1", and I think he might be taller than me.
Please welcome again to AirCheck, Jimmy Fink. So you're there for 2 launches that we're talking about so far, the launch of KROCK in 1985 and the launch of WABC-FM. That had to be pretty exciting.
Well, it was exciting, but it was also I can see the dichotomy of the different people who worked there. For example, my lifelong friend, or since that time anyway, Tony Pigg, who's still my friend, was always warm and welcoming to me, and I learned so much from him. On the other hand, Dave Herman, who also worked there, was like viewing me as, he's a college kid who just all of a sudden landed a job in New York. Meanwhile, I worked at 9 radio stations, all across the country in Podunk, Nebraska or whatever for years, and sort of looked down on me a little bit and poo-pooed the fact that I was there and didn't pay my dues, so to speak, in radio before I got there. But the reason why I was there, and I have to say the reason why I'm still in radio, is because of the music, because I'm into music. That's it. I'm certainly not in it for the money anymore because I work for this small station in the suburbs of New York, and I'm not making anywhere near what Howard Stern is making or what Scott Shannon might have made in his career, and certainly not making what I was making when I was working in the big New York City radio stations, but I'm still in it for the music.
Call letters of a radio station end up being acronyms. They stand for something. When WABC-FM was looking for the change call letters for the future, the present and the future, WPLJ was what they settled on. And the story goes, if I'm not mistaken, it was a reference to a song on the Mothers of Invention album, Burnt Weenie Sandwich. White port and lemon juice. Is that where we're going with this, or is that an urban legend?
Pretty much. Yeah. The Mothers of Invention's version of WPLJ, White Port and Lemon Juice, was a cover. It's a cover song. It was originally done by the Four Deuces, probably in the 1950s, early 60s. I'm not exactly sure when the Four Deuces version of the song came out, but it might have been Dave Herman. I know he took credit for suggesting those as the call letters. And Dave seemed to take credit for a lot of stuff. But I had heard later that really WPLJ was meant to be the call letters in one of the other ABC-owned stations and wound up being at PLJ, at PLJ in New York, sort of by mistake, where one of the other stations grabbed some other call letters instead, and they still had WPLJ, in their minds, and turned it into the WPLJ that took over WABC-FM.
You talked a little bit about the legendary lineup at KROCK, and many had come over to KROCK from WPLJ, and you mentioned a few already, but talk a little bit about your coworkers there at PLJ and the experiences you had during your time there.
Well, one of the things about PLJ and WABC-FM is we were at the beginning, before a format came in and we turned into New York's best rock. We were all free form, and some of the disc jockeys were a little out there. There was one disc jockey's name was Mike Turner, and he was, I loved all these people. I mean, I know I said some things about Dave Herman, but I mean, Dave and I were friends also. It wasn't always an adversarial relationship. But this guy, Mike Turner, he was friends with a lot of Hell's Angels. And Alex Bennett was part of the radio station at the time, too. Mike had Hell's Angels hanging up at the station all the time. And, we had tapestries on the walls. It was a real hippie thing going on there at the old PLJ and WABC-FM. And I remember one time, Elton Rule, who was the president of the entire ABC Corporation, was coming to visit. And they made us take down all the tapestries. They painted the walls. They did all that just because he was doing a walkthrough one day. Because I did these fill-in shows, very often I was there for the Alex Bennett show, which was an overnight talk show. I used to just hang out after I finish my shift. And that was another opportunity where I got to meet a lot of people, including John Lennon was probably the most thrilling person that came up to Alex's show.
My guests are John Lennon and Yoko Ono, and this is WPLJ in New York, which is 95.5 FM stereo. Well, I guess the most common question would be asked you is, how do you feel about the splitting up of...
I think it was a very healthy thing, like almost an amicable divorce. It hasn't been that violent, Court cases don't really involve, us personally. It's usually lawyers sort of bickering in studios, or not in studios, in court or whatever.
Have you ever been together as the four people in recent times outside of court?
No, we haven't. Even before the court thing, it was seldom when four of us would be together. It was usually two or three at the same time. I think Ringo saw Paul at Mick's wedding, just for a couple of, half a day or something. But I spent a lot of time with George and Ringo, that's for sure.
A couple of times at PLJ that I met John. And actually, when he came up to Alex's show, Alex said, John and Yoko are downstairs. Could you go down and get him? So this is another situation where I met people by the elevator.
Wow.
So I went down to the ground floor and I noticed that we had security down there, and John signed in the the security log. But he signed in as Eric Siegel, who's the writer of Love Story, because he and Yoko had this love story going on. So when he signed the book, he didn't sign John Lennon, he signed Eric Siegel. And then rode up the elevator with me, asked me for gum. Got any gum? He said. And God, I thought to myself, Jesus, man, John Lennon is like asking me for gum. He's given me like so much in my life, and all he wants from me is a piece of gum, and I don't have it. And he says, well, I thought all Americans chewed gum. Then I brought him into the studio. And then there was another time when I was there for Alex's show, and John was having when John Lennon was there, and John was having these immigration problems. And I guess maybe somebody wanted to serve him with some kind of subpoena, but never could find where he was. But when he was on the air with Alex Bennett, they knew, he's at the ABC building there, 1330 Avenue of the Americas. Let's go there. So while he's on the air, this guy comes in with a subpoena for John and actually serves him with these papers while he's a guest of the Alex Bennett show. And John got really sort of uptight and nervous and didn't know what to do. And he went to the bathroom and vomited.
Let's go to the phones, because there are a lot of people out there that want to ask you some questions. And they'll probably ask better ones than I've been asking. Boy, you really are belching this morning, man.
Yeah, okay, well...
It could be that Pat Boone button you're wearing.
I feel like throwing up.
Go ahead.
Would you want to carry on? I'll just throw up.
Okay, you have a question for Yoko?
Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You feeling better, John?
Yes, thank you.
Is that the way you start your morning every morning? Just throw up and then start the day?
Right, the summons did it. How did you like, receiving summons early in the morning?
I think I got up, smoked too many cigarettes, and drank too much tea.
They were very clever to catch us here.
Well, I don't know why they didn't just send it to the office. I would have received it.
And then the next day when I came to work and I went to the bathroom, there was a sign on one of the stalls and it said, John Lennon threw up here. Oh, God, it was fantastic.
Well, Jimmy, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention something that perhaps maybe you were a part of in my history as a listener to WPLJ. I'm originally from Yonkers, so Westchester. We moved out to Jersey in the mid-'70s, but still had a lot of family in the area and would come back, and I would spend weekends at my grandparents' house. But I remember my first experience with rock radio was listening to WPLJ, and the very first rock song that I remember hearing was Renegade by Styx, and I think it was the spring of '78. Perhaps maybe you played it.
Yeah, actually, I think one of the air checks that I sent you might have had like somebody introducing Styx or the song Renegade. I don't remember if it was me or maybe it was Carol Miller or something.
This is Zach on WPLJ.
What super music came to you from WPLJ? And this is Tony Pig.
Right here at WPLJ. It's 7 o'clock in the morning. I'm Jimmy Fink.
I'm David Vontino, WPLJ.
I'm Shelley Sunstein, WPLJ News.
The Pat St. John Show from WPLJ.
This is Carol Miller, WPLJ. The music is from Styx.
WPLJ.
There's so many different genres of music that I really like. And, a lot of the music purists weren't really big fans of Styx. But to me, they were just like another corporate. I even liked Mr. Roboto, for God's sakes.
That's two of us.
Yeah, three.
Yeah.
That's three of us.
That song Renegade, man, is just fantastic. That has a great guitar thing in it, and a fantastic organ. It's a great song. I'm glad that was your first experience in rock radio.
Yeah, because prior to that, I was falling asleep listening to Phil Rizzuto and Bill White on WABC, listening to the Yankee games.
And if you happened to tune in and heard Delta Dawn, maybe that wouldn't have been like the greatest thing in the world.
I want to unhit the pause button and hear about this bakery that I understand goes back to like the 1800s with your family.
Yeah, my great-grandfather started Fink Bakery in 1888, and it used to be just a corner bake shop in Yorkville section of Manhattan, Germantown, because they were all immigrants. In the 1920s, my grandfather turned it into, rather than just a small retail corner shop, turned it into a wholesale company that would deliver bread to hospitals, hotels, schools, restaurants all over New York. And the only remnant of a corner bakery that we had was people who would just walk into the factory. It turned into be a bread factory. It was 76th Street between York Avenue and the river, 76th and York. And then in the 1960s, we built a big bread factory, 300,000 square feet in Long Island City, Queens. We were the largest family-owned wholesale bakery in the New York metropolitan area, which is great, but also had its downfall because having a big factory with 100 trucks venturing out from New York City turned out to be a very expensive proposition in the late 1990s when a lot of out-of-town bakers would start bringing in cheap bread from even as far away as Canada. Here in New York City, we had the New York City taxes and the cost of New York City utilities. And also we were a union shop. So we had two unions, the Teamsters and the Bakers Union. And we wound up like paying $25 an hour to a guy who just put bread in a box. So by the time 2000 came around, we were hurting. So we sold the company, and the person we sold it to only lasted about 18 months until he finally actually went out of business.
Wow. I'm picturing something that looks like the bakery in Moonstruck with Nicolas Cage down in the basement with the long wooden spatula pulling loaves in and out of the oven.
Yeah,
kind of place?
No, I wouldn't say it was like that. The oven was probably like a half a block long. It was a big, a big machine with conveyor belts and racks and things going over your head, and it's a bread factory. I still miss the smell of it all.
Our follow-up episode is going to be cooking with Jimmy Fink.
Yeah, there we go.
It's going to start with bread.
It's funny you should say that, because a lot of times when I interviewed these stars, these rock stars, I came up with an idea of a show called Cooking with the Stars, and I would ask them, well, what do you like to cook? And tell us how to do that. And I have some great recipes from Todd Rundgren and a bunch of other people, like the Hart Girls, Ann and Nancy Wilson. They all came up with some recipes for my show that never made it anywhere, Cooking with the Stars.
You're listening to Season 4 of Air Check, a podcast about radio's personality from radio personalities. Rich and Paul have lined up another roster of guests just as compelling as Seasons 1, 2, and 3. Air Check Season 1 includes conversations with Eddie Trunk, Danny Bonaducci, Nina Blackwood, and more. Air Check, available now on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. You can also tell your smart speaker to play Air Check Podcast.
Well, you've met many over the years through your career. You know who were good interviews, polite on air and off mic, and this is a guy that I also had a chance to interview a couple of different times. I know he was great on mic and off mic. You've interviewed him many times. Tell us about your experiences with Graham Nash.
Graham and I really had our closest encounters when he did a benefit show up here in Westchester for this organization called Open Door Family Medical Centers. And over the years, we've brought in many really top-drawer stars, including Graham Nash and B-52s and Elvis Costello and several others to do benefit concerts at the Performing Arts Center of Purchase College. Graham was just very open and also talkative and friendly. He's a great photographer. He's written just some fantastic songs. And I think you have a little clip of him talking about the photo shoot for the cover of the Crosby, Stills and Nash album.
Yeah, well, we were a funky band. We had no pretenses. I mean, each of us had been in a hit band already for years, between the Byrds and the Springfield and the Hollies. So it wasn't new to us, all this. And we wanted to make it down home, and we wanted us to appear like we were one of our fans, which we are. We're in many cases very ordinary people, and we wanted to make it feel intimate and feel close to the people. And when we found that couch on in front of that old house, we thought that would be a perfect thing. And then, of course, when we got the negatives back from Kodak or wherever Henry Diltz, who shot the cover, got his work developed, we realized that we were sitting in the wrong order, because we had decided the day after taking the picture to call ourselves Crosby, Stills and Nash, but in the only frame that made sense, we were sitting in the wrong order. So we went back like 2 days later to reshoot it in the right order. Building was gone. It was just a pile of rubble in the back lot.
Wow. Jimmy, let's go back to the early 80s in New York City. Things, again, were changing up and down the radio dial. The music scene, again, dictating formatics. Summer of 1981, MTV became a thing. Then the following summer, a radio station with call letters WAPP came on the air in New York City. In late 1983, another new station made its mark, Z100. Talk a little bit about that environment and how it affected the new direction that PLJ eventually took as they moved away from rock.
Yeah, well, our program director was Larry Berger, longtime program director of WPLJ. He's also passed away now, moved out to California and lived in San Francisco after he left PLJ eventually. But he was there for maybe 20 years or so. I don't know. Larry never thought that we should worry about what other people were doing. He wanted us to do what we do best. That's what he was concerned with. Yeah, WAPP came on with a commercial-free summer, which was great for them.
WAPP is the Apple, and the Apple is commercial-free. WAPP, FM 103.5. Rolling commercial-free all summer long. New York's newest FM, rockin' the summer. 103.5 WAPP.
Meanwhile, the station only lasted a couple of years after that. Once they played commercials, nobody listened anymore.
Yeah.
Larry just always wanted us to do what we do best and not react to anything else that's happening in the marketplace. But Larry also, brought in, basically based on the format that Rick Sklar had invented over at WABC, the top 40 station. He sort of brought that format and turned it into a format to be used for album rock.
1978 will be WPLJ's greatest year of music ever. Join us for all the excitement found only on WPLJ. This is the music you've asked for. WPLJ 95.5 FM, New York's best rock.
with the songs being broken down into different categories based on whether they are current, recurrent, meaning for the past, sometime in the past year or so, or old, and then also broken them down on another subcategory, whether it was a single or an album cut. And then there was another category called X, which was just like Spice, maybe not a hit, whatever. And then, the combination of coming up with a formula for when to play and how often to play the current songs mixed in with the older songs. There was your AOR format, New York's Best Rock. Although WNEW-FM sort of had the aura of being free form, they sort of had a format also. It might not have been as constrained as PLJ's was, but it worked. It worked for both stations.
Welcome to the place where rock lives. 102.7 WNEW-FM. This is no bungalow. It's a rock and roll mansion. The home of rock and roll. WNEW-FM. The excitement is all courtesy of the hottest rock personalities in radio. Live concerts, 18-song music marathons, and rock and roll variety galore. Move to where rock lives. New York's first choice for rock and roll. 102.7 WNEW-FM.
I can't say, that there was any one thing. I think it was the way music changed that eventually led PLJ to change and go more in the pop vein after being an album rock station for 13 years. But it did.
Time for a special edition of Let's Hear It with our program director, Larry Berger.
We did make some fairly substantial changes in our music policy on the last day of June. And we did it with a lot of forethought, and we really found that many people liked it and many people didn't like it.
When we changed format, there was a meeting of all the air staff, and I remember Jim Kerr was there and said, "This is how we describe the format change, let's put it bluntly." He held up a piece of paper and he tore off a little piece of it, and he held up the big piece and said, "This is what we used to play," and threw it away, and held up the little piece and said, "This is what we play now." So that's how the format changes happen. And I always tell people, a radio station is not your friend. We want to be your friend. We want to be friendly, but we are not a person. And if one day the people who own the radio station think that they can make more money doing something else, one day your friendly rock radio station, you may turn it on in the morning and it'll be a Spanish talk station. And don't think of it as your friend who turned its back on you. It's a business.
Well, it's true. Radio stations are not your friend, but like it or not, those personalities behind the mic, like Jimmy, certainly are. And radio needs to reinvest in that notion. Looking forward to more from Jimmy in our next episode.
Yeah, it's another 4-part series.
On part 3 of 4, we find out what happened in 1996 when KROCK's format changed, what Jimmy hates the most about being on the air. Jimmy also shares with us his interview with Mick Jones of Foreigner and his daughter's encounter with Sir Paul McCartney.
Remember, you can follow us, stream, and download every episode of Aircheck on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. You can also tell your smart speaker to play Aircheck Podcast. If you haven't done so, give us a great rating. We'd also love to hear from you on our Facebook page, Aircheck Me.
This is Rich DeSisto.
And I'm Paul Kelly.
We'll talk to you soon.
Closing out another episode of Aircheck, a podcast about radio's personality from radio personalities. If you have radio stories to share, we'd love to hear from you. Join the Aircheck guest list. Email aircheckme@gmail.com. Musical props are Chris Gordon's. Announcer props, I'll take those. Greg O'Brien, the OB. Aircheck is available now on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. You can also tell your smart speaker to play Aircheck Podcast. Aircheck is the creation of RDPK Productions.